Welcome back. I know it's been a while. Today we are going to be talking about some of the most successful con artists throughout human history. Some of these stories are just insane as far as how they got away with it, and some of them make perfect sense for the time period that they actually happened in. So we're going to get right into it, starting off with Gregor MacGregor. Crazy name. Gregor MacGregor was born on Christmas Eve in 1786. I'm probably going to butcher some of the names of these towns, just a heads up, in Glengyle, Scotland. This dude came from a well-known Scottish clan. His family had a history of military service, and his father was a captain of the East India Company. So, no matter what con he pulled, really, at least he was going to end up better person than his father was. MacGregor joined the British Army at 16. He served during the Napoleonic Wars. His family purchased him the rank of an ensign. Purchasing a rank was something pretty common in that time period. Basically allowed people that came from wealthy families to bypass the actual work that was required to receive that promotion, so good for him. He then married into a wealthy / influential family. This is something that we're going to see throughout the video with many of the con artists. It tends to be a common theme, which of course he then used to gain connections and influence and things like that in order to assist him throughout his scams during his lifetime. After 2 months of the marriage and also a heavy dowry from his wife's father, he again purchased a promotion, this time to the rank of captain in the British Army. The required wait time to serve as a captain was 7 years, and of course he was able to bypass this because what does it always come back to? The money. His wife's family was his primary source of income during the time, and after she passed away, he decided to go seek fame and money elsewhere. He then moved to South America to fight during the region's wars of independence. This is going to be something that comes up later, so just keep it in mind. There is a lot of recorded history from his time serving in South America. He led a cavalry unit. He also was married another time, but that is not what the video is about, so we will move on to the scandal. On the 29th of April in 1820, George Frederick Augustus, in present-day Nicaragua and Honduras, signed a document granting MacGregor and his heirs 8 million acres, an area that is larger than the country of Wales, and this was of course in exchange for rum and jewelry. The land was very beautiful, but it was unfit for cultivation and unfit for raising livestock, which is a major problem whenever that is how people at the time were surviving and feeding their family. In mid-1821, he appears back in London, this time presenting himself as the Cazique of Poitiers. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, please forgive me and blame the YouTube pronunciation video. Cazique is a Spanish-American name for chief. He effectively names himself as the cacique or the chief of this non-existent country called Poitiers. He of course was never actually given this title by anyone with meaningful authority, but it worked, and the middle and upper class in London began to hold him in a high regard. This began one of the most brazen, confident schemes that history has ever seen. MacGregor devised convoluted constitutional arrangements for the fictional country of Poitiers, drew up commercial and banking mechanisms. The imaginary country had an honor system, landed titles, and went so far as to have a flag for the country of Poitiers. MacGregor then had Poitiesian offices set up in London, Edinburgh, and Glasgow to sell impressive-looking land certificates. These land certificates were originally made by hand, and then, after some money had been made from the scheme, began to be printed on an official press. These land certificates were sold to the general public in order to coordinate prospective immigrants to the country of Poitiers. I think you can see where this is going. He then went on one of the most insane and also brilliant marketing strategies that I have ever heard of or read about. He publishes a guidebook to the fictional country of Poitiers. The guidebook was filled with elaborate details detailing the country's beautiful and fertile land, the natives that were loyal to England and loved to have English immigrants come and live in their country. The towns and the countrysides and mansions that lined the streets of the capital city. He details a Poyasian army and names specific government officials that are set in the country, all of which, of course, are completely fictitious. He then begins to give interviews in national newspapers speaking about the country of Poyais. He engaged publicists to write advertisements and leaflets about the country in order to get more prospective immigrants to, therefore, make the transition over to the country of Poyais. This is probably the craziest part to me. He also commissioned for artists and musicians to sing ballads about the country of Poyais in the streets of London, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. The marketing went so far to even claim that Poyais had, quote, globules, I don't know, whatever this word is, of pure gold floating down its rivers. And surprisingly, the marketing was so successful that he was even able to raise the prices of the land certificates on multiple different occasions without ever seeing a decline in sales. Needless to say, the public had bought into the scheme. On top of the sale of the land certificates, MacGregor had also spent several months organizing the issue of Poyasian government bonds, or in this case, a completely fictional, backed by nothing bond, which of course would be sold on the London Stock Exchange. A London bank with a sterling silver reputation underwrote a $200,000 loan for the country of Poyais. It's around 26.5 million US dollars today, to give you an idea of just the type and the grandiosity of the scheme that MacGregor was able to pull off. The loan was of course secured on all the revenues of the government of Poyais, including the sale of land to the prospective immigrants. They then offered provisional certificates for the Poyasian bonds. Hundreds of people signed up to immigrate to the country, specifically Scots. MacGregor, knowing that they were more likely to trust a fellow Scot, targeted them specifically. It was enough people to fill 7 ships. This included a City of London banker who was going to be the head of the Poyasian bank, doctors, civil servants, and young men whose families had bought them ranks in the Poyasian military, similar to what MacGregor actually did with the English army. Not to mention an Edinburgh cobbler who was set to be the shoemaker to the Princess of Poyais. MacGregor personally saw these immigrants off as they sailed from London on the 10th of September 1822, entrusting to the captain of the ship 5,000 Poyasian banknotes, which were produced by the Bank of Scotland's official printer. Many of the people who planned to move to the country of Poyais, of course, brought their life savings with them, and they were more than happy to exchange their gold for the fictional currency. A second immigrant ship was hired by MacGregor in October of 1822, just 1 month after the prior ship had left, and it sailed from Leith in 1823 with 200 immigrants on board. MacGregor again had the audacity to see the settlers off, coming aboard the ship to make sure that they were comfortable. Because this was the maiden immigrant voyage from Scotland, he made sure to let all of the passengers know that women and children would be sailing for free, and rowed back to cheers from the immigrants because of his generosity. The ship's captain fired a 6-gun broadside salute, and the immigrants began their journey to the country of Poyais. Of course, when the settlers arrived, they found nothing. Only an uninhabited jungle, and many of the settlers died from yellow fever, malaria, starvation, and even suicide. Survivors returned to London to expose the scam later in 1823, but by that time, MacGregor had already sent 5 other ships full of prospective immigrants to the country of Poyais. Of the roughly 250 immigrants that sailed on the first 2 ships, 180 had died. Less than 50 ever returned back to England or Scotland. The London press began to report extensively on the Poyais scandal over the following weeks and months, emphasizing the colonist struggles and asserting that MacGregor had been the leader in a grand scheme of deception. 6 of the survivors, including one whose name was Hasty that lost 2 children during the journey, claimed that they were misquoted in the articles, and in October of 1823 even signed an affidavit insisting that the blame lay not with MacGregor, but with the captain of the ship and the other immigrants. MacGregor himself, of course, asserted that he too had been defrauded and embezzled, led astray by the ship's captain, and claimed that jealous merchants in British Honduras were undermining the upcoming of the new grand country of Poyais as it threatened to hurt their profits. Even after the scheme collapsed in Britain, MacGregor moved to France and continued the Poyais scheme, attempting to sell more bonds and coordinate new prospective immigrants. While in France, MacGregor negotiated with the, I'm not going to say this correctly, Nouvelle Nestrie company. This company, whose managing director was a Frenchman named Lehoubi. He agreed to sell the French company 500,000 acres of Poyasian land. He published a new constitution for the country of Poyais in August of 1825, this time describing it as a republic. He would of course remain head of state with the title Cazique, and just a few days later, by the 18th of August, 1825, raised a new £300,000 loan, $37.9 million today, through Thomas Jenkins and Company, an obscure London bank, with the bonds promising a 2.5% APY. French government officials began to become suspicious as 30 new people requested passports for a country that none of them have ever heard of. After all of the marketing was completed in England. They ordered this company's ship to remain in port, and some of the other immigrants began to become suspicious and reported to the police, which then led to the arrest of MacGregor, Lehoubi, and one other man associated with the crime. Both of the 2 other men seemingly still unaware that Poyais was a scam at all. MacGregor went into hiding in the French provinces, and Lehoubi went to the Netherlands. MacGregor was arrested after 3 months and brought to La Force prison in December of 1825. The 2 other men and MacGregor were brought to trial in April of 1826. Lehoubi, who was still in the Netherlands, obviously in an attempt to escape trial, was tried in absentia, and the Crown prosecution's case was seriously hampered by his absence, particularly because most of the documents that would be enough to convict the 3 gentlemen were with him in the Netherlands. MacGregor's lawyer asserted that if anything illegal had happened, that it certainly would be the fault of the missing manager, Lehoubi, whom would have no reason to flee the country if he was not responsible for the scheme. Also stated that MacGregor himself may simply have been a victim of Lehoubi. The prosecutor concluded that there was insufficient evidence for him to go through with the trial. He also complimented MacGregor for cooperating with the prosecution fairly and openly, and of course withdrew the charges. Days later, the French government was successful in extraditing Lehoubi back to France. MacGregor, the other gentleman, and Lehoubi learned that they would have to stand trial again. The fresh trial was scheduled for the 20th of May, but it was postponed because the prosecutor realized that he needed much more time because he simply was not ready to go to trial at this point. The delay gave MacGregor and Mary Lou, his defense lawyer, plenty of time enough to write a 5,000-word, largely fictional document discussing MacGregor's past, activities in the Americas, and complete innocence related to the fraud. The full 5,000-word, which is about equivalent to a 20-page research paper by today's standards, was presented in full in the courtroom. Lehoubi was convicted of making false representations and sentenced to 13 months in prison, while MacGregor and the other gentlemen were found not guilty on all charges. MacGregor, of course, quickly moved his family back to London. The scheme was continued by MacGregor, however, just with much less success than he had seen in his previous runs. He again convinced a bank to underwrite a large loan for the sale of bonds. However, the papers circulated warning investors to, quote, take care of your pockets, another Poyet humbug. The interesting thing about this is that the man who literally wrote the book on the Poyet scheme, David Sinclair, stated that the papers had no clue that Poyet was indeed a completely fictional place, but rather were writing these reports based on the poor returns of the previously issued bonds. And I quote, "Nobody thought to question the legitimacy of Poyet itself." By 1834, MacGregor was back in Scotland and living in Edinburgh. He paid some of the unredeemed securities by issuing yet another set of Poyetian land certificates. 2 years later, he published another constitution for the country of Poyet, this time focusing around a much smaller region located by the Black River, of course, keeping himself as the head of state, and now dropping the title of cazique and naming himself president. An attempt of MacGregor to sell some land certificates to the country of Poyet in 1837 marks the very last time that this scheme was ever documented. But interestingly enough, potentially even more crazy than the scheme itself is the last few years of MacGregor's life and his, how else do I say it, honorable death and burial. His new wife had passed away in 1838, and following her death, he moved back to Caracas in Venezuela, and in October of 1838 applied for not only his citizenship to the country, but also a reinstatement of his position in the Venezuelan military, but get this, with back pay and a pension. The president of Venezuela at the time was a revolutionary comrade of MacGregor, and he was granted not only his citizenship, but also 1/3 pension in March of 1839. He was confirmed as a Venezuelan citizen and divisional general in the Venezuelan army, and he settled in the capital and became a well-respected member of the community there. He died in his home in Caracas in December of 1845, and he was buried with full military honors. Yes, full military honors for the man that had scammed hundreds, if not thousands, caused the deaths of hundreds of men, women, and children, defrauded banks, defrauded governments, of course, was buried with full military honors. The new president of Venezuela, cabinet members, and head generals were all at his funeral, marching behind the procession. Papers described General MacGregor as, and I quote, "a valiant champion of independence." There, of course, was no reference to the cazique of Poyet in any of the obituaries or documents that have been found up to this day. If you thought the last one was crazy, this one is even worse. It is probably a story that you at least remember hearing about, if not minorly in a history class, maybe from another YouTube video. But the unfortunate thing is that this also took place in France, a place which, as I'm sure you could tell from the first part, I have no idea how to pronounce anything for. But I will still tell the story and do my best. Apologies for any mispronunciations. This is the story of Genet de Valois Saint-Remy, or potentially better known as Genet de la Motte. Genet was born in 1756 to a family with noble lineage, seeming to become a trend that, especially in the older time period, many of these con people, scam artists, fraud artists, whatever you want to call them, all came from wealthy families, or at least wealthier families than the common people. She was a descendant of the French royal family, albeit it was through an illegitimate son of King Henry II, and her scheme, scandal, fraud was so valuable in history that many people attribute her specifically as being the cause for the French Revolution, and potentially more importantly, the destruction of the French monarchy in its entirety. Genet and her sister were sent to a boarding school where they were given a stipend of £900 through a fund set up to help the impoverished descendants of nobility. Must be nice. They were supposed to become nuns, both Genet and her sister, but decided to return back in the town they resided in, where they lived with the Sermont family. Genet married the Sermont's nephew. When it became clear that Nicholas, the Sermont's nephew, would be unable to provide for her expensive tastes, She decided that she was going to go to the royal family in order to ask for more funds due to her royal blood. She decided to approach Queen Marie Antoinette, anticipating that the queen would not only be generous, but also understand her situation due to their commonality of gender. Marie Antoinette had already heard of Genet and refused to even speak with her at all. Interestingly enough, at the same time, a renowned jeweler in France was attempting to sell an immensely expensive and luxurious diamond necklace, the history of which is quite interesting as well. We will get into that in a moment. He had invested a fortune into this necklace, and even though he did have great standing as not only a citizen but a high-quality jeweler, he needed desperately to get this necklace out of his hands in order to avoid bankruptcy. The necklace was set to be purchased by the previous king as a gift for one of his mistresses, but the king, Louis XV, died of smallpox during the creation of the jewel. He soon realized that due to the immense price tag on the necklace, only a king would be able to afford it. Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette refused to purchase it. Many scholars think this is because Marie Antoinette's disdain for the mistress in which the necklace was intended. Around 1783, Genet met Cardinal Rohan, and she quickly became not only his confidant, but also his mistress. Because of her position and closeness to the cardinal, she became aware that Cardinal Rohan's only desire was to obtain approval from the Queen Marie. However, Marie had an extreme disdain for Cardinal Rohan because just shortly before, he had attempted to thwart her marriage to Louis XVI. He also was known to have talked shit behind her back, and she was particularly not fond of his scandalous lifestyle. During this time that Genet was the confidant and mistress of Cardinal Rohan, she did still remain married to her husband and also took up a lover of her own, Rothau de Villette. But I'm going to be calling him Villette. It might be Villet, like I said. I don't know. Genet convinced Cardinal Rohan that she had obtained the queen's favor, that she was a close confidant to the queen, and that she was going to do everything in her power to make sure that the queen began to see Cardinal Rohan in a favorable light. Thus began an alleged correspondence between Cardinal Rohan and Queen Marie Antoinette. Correspondence that, of course, would be entirely fictional. Genet both delivered and returned the correspondence between them, affirming to Cardinal Rohan that they were, of course, from Queen Marie Antoinette. As the tone of the letters began to become very warm, Cardinal Rohan began to believe that Queen Marie Antoinette was falling in love with him. And as I'm sure many cardinals at the time would do, thinking that the queen was falling in love with them, he became enamored with her. He begged Genet to arrange a secret nighttime meeting between him and the queen, knowing that it must be done in secret, of course, due to her status, and Genet agreed. The secret meeting took place in August of 1784 in the garden of the Palace of Versailles. The cardinal met with who he believed to be Queen Marie Antoinette, but was in fact a prostitute who had been informed of the scheme by Genet and told her role. Her name was Nicole. Genet specifically hired this person due to her resemblance to the queen. Cardinal Rohan offered her a rose during their late-night rendezvous in the Palace of Versailles. Nicole, in her role as the queen, told Cardinal Rohan that she would forgive him for their past disagreements. Genet de la Motte began to take advantage of Cardinal Rohan's trust in her by borrowing large sums of money from him. But this is only the start. She would tell him that they were for respectable charitable works, that she was putting that money to good use for the people, but with this money she was actually using it to begin to make her way up into high society. She continued to boast about her relationship to the queen, leading not only Cardinal Rohan, but many others in her circle to believe her. The jewelers, of course, becoming aware of this rumor of the closeness between Genet and the queen, resolved that they would use Genet to persuade the queen to purchase the necklace. And Genet, of course, was informed by the jewelers that she would be afforded a commission for the sale. In January of 1785, Genet told Cardinal Rohan that the queen greatly desired the necklace, But due to the extreme poverty and tension between the common person and nobility at the time, she didn't want to do it publicly and needed Cardinal Rohan to act as an intermediary for the purchase. A little while later, Rohan agrees and eventually negotiates the purchase of the necklace for 2,000 of whatever this word is, livres, which would be roughly about $17.5 million today. This would be paid in installments, and Cardinal Rohan brought the jewelers letters outlining the agreement, of course in the Queen's handwriting and with her signature. Rohan then took the necklace to Genet's house, where a man who he believed to be a valet of the Queen took the necklace and went to supposedly deliver it to her. The necklace was promptly picked apart and sold on the black markets in both Paris and London by none other than Genet de la Motte. When the time came to pay, Genet presented to the jewelers the cardinal's notes, which they deemed to be insufficient. The jeweler then goes to Queen Marie Antoinette, who then informs the jeweler that not only did she not receive the necklace, but she had never ordered it to begin with. He recounted the story and the negotiations, and shortly after, arrests began to be made. Shortly after those arrests, the scandal hits the media. Keep in mind, this was at a time of immense tension between the common people and the nobility and oligarchy in France. In August of 1785, Cardinal Rohan is brought into court before the Queen, a keeper of seals, and the minister of the court. In his defense, Rohan produces a letter signed Marie Antoinette de France. In the time period, royalty would sign with their baptismal name, a detail that was missed by Cardinal Rohan. This not only caused more issues for Cardinal Rohan, but also drove the king to have a great disdain for him, as, and I quote, "He breathed royal etiquette since birth, and could not understand how a courtier, and above all, Rohan, a member of a family so keen on the details of status, could make such a mistake." Rohan was arrested and taken to the Bastille. On his way home, he sent a letter ordering the destruction of all of the documents. 3 days later, Genet was arrested, but she had plenty of time to destroy all of the evidence. They also arrested the prostitute who had impersonated the Queen, as well as Rétaux, Genet's lover, who confessed that he had forged the letters in the Queen's handwriting. A sensational and very public trial resulted in the acquittal of Cardinal Rohan and Nicole, the woman who had impersonated the Queen. Genet was condemned to whipping and a branding on both shoulders with the letter V, standing for this word, which meant thief in French. She also was sent to life in imprisonment at the prostitutes' prison, Salpêtrière. And in June of the following year, she escaped the prison by disguising herself as a boy. Genet immediately returned to London and in 1789 published this, where she, of course, went directly back to libeling Queen Marie Antoinette. Despite all of the findings and the result of the trial, because of the tension held between the common people and nobility, many people in France believed that Queen Marie Antoinette had used Genet as a scapegoat, and that this was simply her doing in order to satisfy her disdain for Cardinal Rohan. For one, the Queen was disappointed in his acquittal, and if he was innocent after all, the public believed that she shouldn't be so. Also shortly after, he was deprived of his duties as a cardinal and exiled, making it more likely to the common that he was being used by nobility rather than being an innocent dupe, which seems to be the case. Many people also believed that the Parliament's acquittal of the cardinal meant that Queen Marie Antoinette had to have been involved in the scandal. All of this together began to form in the minds of the common people that Marie Antoinette was not only a bad leader, but a vain person who drastically cared more about her own desires and living a luxurious lifestyle than the common people. And interestingly enough, even modern day media continues to portray Queen Marie Antoinette in that way. The thing that many of you probably know about her, if anything at all, is the saying, quote, "Let them eat cake," which according to almost all historians is not a quote that was ever spoken by Queen Marie Antoinette. It's rather an anecdote that is used to show that a person has a obliviousness to the needs of the common people. This quote appears in folklore in many parts of the world, and many of which come even before the birth, let alone the coronation of Marie Antoinette. After the scandal broke to the general public, there was an immense increase in public literature defaming the Queen. Quote, "Her unpopularity was so great after the diamond necklace affair that it could no longer be ignored by either the Queen or the government. Her appearances in public all but ceased. As she became more and more associated with the scandal, and already being perceived as an enemy of the public by the common people, her reputation was destroyed. These writings about Marie Antoinette following the scandal became, according to many historians, the kindling of the French Revolution, which led not only to her death, but also the death of all of the nobility and oligarchs, and the downfall of the French monarchy. All of this, of course, being caused by one woman who sought to obtain a higher place in society, Jeanne de la Motte.